Hey there, loved ones. This is Management 3130, Principles of Management, Session 4. If we were meeting face-to-face today, it would be 25 June 2020. No admin stuff to share with you. Today we're going to talk about ethics, important and messy, complex subject. Before I do, though, I have to tell you kind of a fun story. I want to talk to you about Murphy's Law. I have a dear friend in Atlanta, and I was in his office a number of years ago, and he had a really high-quality lithographic print of Murphy's Law displayed in his office. And of course, it had the base law. If it can possibly go wrong, it will. But again, this was great art, and there were like 100 variants of Murphy's Law on the poster. One of them, of course, that I've always enjoyed: no good deed goes unpunished. However, I want to share with you my favorite. Out of all the variations of Murphy's Law, the one that I'm going to share with you is the one that I treasure the most. When the enemy is in range, so are you. Again, I just wanted to share that quick story about Murphy's Law with you. So now, we're going to jump into chapter 3 in the textbook on ethics. And I want to point out, this is just an observation, it's not a criticism. There's no real theme in this chapter. It's a collection of dozens, maybe hundreds of concepts, and some of them are introduced with just a single paragraph. For example, well, again, I don't need to give you examples because you're going to see all of them. So let me start out. I'm on page 78 right now, and the authors talk about the triple bottom line. This is a concept that's been part of corporate social responsibility or corporate governance for maybe 25 or 30 years, but it's never gotten any traction. And the reason it has no traction is there are no measures that exist to capture what happens with people or on the planet. The triple bottom line argues that you measure outcomes for people, for the planet, and for profit. Well, the profit part we get. Now, we have all sorts of well-developed and well-regulated reporting standards in the domain of accounting. But what about people? How do we measure people? Do we measure their growth? What about turnover? What if you have somebody very promising and that person leaves? That's disruptive if we're studying this stuff longitudinally. What if we promote people and we don't choose well? What if we promote people based on favoritism instead of on merit? And then they get to this new position and they crash and burn. I've worked for a couple of people in my life that I would literally describe as overseeing a reign of terror. I mean, they're just the worst managers in the history of worst managers. But yet they stay in organizations. So my point is, there's no way to measure people. And the other part about the planet is there are no measures of planet. There is so much disagreement on global warming. About the best science that I can discern, I'm a scientist, just not in that domain, about the best science that I can discern is over the last century, over the last 100 years, the average temperature at the surface of the Earth has gone up 0.75 degrees. Over 100 years. And of course, we can look back to prior ages. You know, the Bronze Age, the Stone Age, anything like that. The age when the Dallas Cowboys were a good football team. We can look back to any age and find all sorts of evidence of the Earth cooling and the Earth warming. But if over 100 years, the change has been 0.75 degrees, I don't think we're in crisis. And in fact, if you look at a lot of the stuff on global warming, it's not science, they are mathematical models. People are using Newtonian math to predict something. They don't have data, and then of course if you go 15 or 20 years and nothing happens, they'll say, well, it's an anomaly. It's in the natural sciences, and we do not control Mother Earth or the atmosphere. So my point is, the reason that this triple bottom line, people, profit, planet, never has gotten traction is there are absolutely no measures that have any reliability, any validity, that would grab important information about people or about the planet. There are all sorts of opinions, but opinions are simply uninformed preferences. For example, I like blue cars. that means nothing unless I'm buying a vehicle. Would you agree? Opinions are uninformed preferences. They're not judgments. They're not based on significant knowledge or research or experience. But so much of what we see in contemporary press is just opinions. So now I'm on 79, and the authors start to talk about the stakeholder concept. And that's pretty powerful on so many dimensions. Classically, the difference between a stockholder and a stakeholder is a stockholder owns a fractional interest of a company. Let's assume that I own 10 shares of Texaco. I don't. The last time I checked, and I did check a couple of years ago, the last time I checked, Texaco had about 530,000 shareholders, and some of them were institutional shareholders like pension funds or any number of things like that, of people that are managing funds, and a lot of them are individuals. But there were more than 500,000 of shareholders. So my point is, if I owned 10 shares of Texaco, I would have a very, very small fractional interest. But if the company pays dividends, I benefit. If the value of the stock goes up, I benefit because I'm a co-owner. Tiny fractional interest, but I'm an owner. So that's what a shareholder is. A stakeholder is anyone who is impacted by a company's behavior. If Texaco is in the business of energy, and it is, it would matter to me that they behave responsibly, but it would also matter to me that they don't just grab stuff out of the ground, but that they would look into exploration. Where can we find other deposits of crude oil? And also, if in this exploration thing, they looked at other sources of energy, wind, solar, geothermal, whatever the case may be. So my point is, stakeholders would be anyone who's impacted by the decisions made in an organization. So which means that there are internal stakeholders, people who work for the company, vendors, stuff like that, people who are directly affected, and then there are lots of external stakeholders, people who are impacted by the company's decision. And the reality is, if we talk about stakeholders, and this won't surprise you, I do an ethics module in every class I teach. It doesn't matter if it's a core management course like principles or strategy. It doesn't matter if it's an elective course like leadership. It doesn't matter if it's on the entrepreneurship and innovation emphasis. If I teach an upper division course, there's some module in it about ethics. Because I don't think that we should ever make any decision in an organization that impacts other people unless we consider the ethical implications. And I'm going to do a PowerPoint presentation in a few minutes after we get through chapter 3, and I'll try to bring that to life more. So I'm pretty keen on this thing about us being ethical decision makers, but I'm going to make sure that we all have a shared understanding of that. The dilemma when you talk about stakeholders is a lot of stakeholders have competing interests, and it's sometimes hard to reconcile those interests. Very, very difficult thing to do. There are almost no universal solutions. So I want to move now to a discussion of corporate social responsibility, and I need the whiteboard to do that. So give me just a moment. I'm going to put a model of corporate social responsibility up, and then we'll talk about it together. This CSR stuff is discussed, or at least the discussion starts on page 100 of the text. Corporate social responsibility. I want to take you back about 30 years or so, maybe 35. Let's go to, say, the middle 80s. I'm putting a model on the board that only has two variables: corporate social responsibility, the way organizations behave, responsibly or not, and performance. So here's what theorists thought perhaps 30, 35 years ago. And I know that this is intuitive, and there are people who probably believe this today, but there's no support for it. There are people who believe then and now that if a firm behaves responsibly, if it engages in corporately social, or forgive me, socially responsible behavior, that behavior, acting responsibly, will yield better performance, whether the performance is market share, net income, stock valuations, whatever the case may be. So here's what happened, and this surprises no one who studies these phenomena. For about 25 or 30 years, all the theorists were suggesting that CSR influences performance, couldn't find any relationship. Study after study, and there was a complete disconnect. It could not discern a relationship in which social responsibility positively influenced performance. That's what that arrow meant. So then, somebody, and I've forgotten his name, I've read his work, and he's pretty well regarded. He's an ethicist who studies this stuff. Then, a very bright researcher said, what if we have this backwards? What if instead of behaving responsibly, influencing performance, what if firms who perform well behave responsibly? So what this theorist did is he said, I think the arrow flows in the other direction. I think firms that enjoy good performance are in a position to behave responsibly. Boom! All kinds of discovery. Just study after study after study. What we found is that firms who are profitable, firms that have high valuations of their stock, have the resources to engage in socially responsible behavior. When I was at the University of Louisville, I was there for 7 years, and General Electric had a big facility in Louisville called the Appliance Park, and at one point there were like 20,000 employees, engineers, production people, because at the time GE had a significant presence in appliances, whether home or commercial. And because GE was a very successful company and had all kinds of resources, whether from net income or profitability or stock valuations, it literally required everybody who was management track in that facility to engage in something like 30 or 40 hours of community service a year. Big stuff. And this is not just one weekend, scraping up leaves. This is literacy programs for adults that have difficulty reading. This is working with parks and recreation and school districts to put playground equipment in place. 40 hours a year. And these people are all compensated. The company was paying the salaries of thousands of well-compensated employees to go into the community and do cool stuff. Brown and Williamson is a major player in the tobacco industry, and it was based in Louisville for a number of years. I think it's moved to another state now. But Brown and Williamson, because it made a great deal of money selling tobacco products, funded the arts, museums, and all kinds of cool things. If you look at the Parker College of Business, how did we get endowed? Greg Parker, oh yeah, that's right, we bad. Greg Parker has successfly run a chain of convenience stores, and he's regarded nationally as just a top of the mountain guy. In terms of his commitment to community, success, Parker donates all kinds of money to school systems and other notable things. But because Greg Parker was very successful in business, he endowed this performance, permitted him to behave in socially responsible ways, because he endowed the Parker College with $5 million. So the point is that the people who believed that behaving responsibly yields good performance headed backwards. It turns out, and we have evidence that's gone on for decades now, firms that enjoy high levels of performance have the organizational resources to behave in ways that are socially responsible, to contribute to the community, whether that is people, money, whatever the resources may be. So I want you to understand that when we talk about ethics, you're going to hear this discussion of socially responsible behavior. And I want you to know what the science says. There's a short discussion on climate change in here, and I'm not going to do anything with it because there is so much dissent. The mathematical models have proved wrong for 20 years, but the people who are alarmists still insist that it's right. And again, I don't think we're going to spend any time. So let me move on to a discussion of trust. I'm on 106, and that's where trust is mentioned in the textbook. And I want to share a couple of thoughts with you, which are pretty powerful. It's very difficult to divorce trust from ethical behavior. That's why it's embedded in this discussion. I'm convinced that trust is the foundation of every important relationship you and I will ever have, ever. Whether it's an interpersonal relationship, a business relationship, it doesn't matter. If you don't trust me, there is no foundation for us to have an important interpersonal relationship. You're going to be distant, you're going to be guarded. In fact, when we don't trust people, what do? We write contracts, don't we? If you punch out of here, degree in hand, get a great job, and you think, oh my goodness, I've been driving this 19-year-old sled with 410,000 miles on it and 3 wheels for too long. I'm going to go get a new car or truck. So you go to the bank, and the bank says, great, decent credit at your career stage, good income, we will loan you the money for this vehicle. Now, so is the bank just going to shake your hand and leave? No. You will sign a note that obligates you to pay, and the note will talk about remedies, what happens if you don't, and one of the remedies will be that this contract, if you stop paying on the loan, permits the bank to repossess the car, the truck, whatever it is that you bought. So we use contracts when we don't trust people. In fact, I hadn't planned on this, but what's a prenup? Is a prenuptial agreement a contract where two people who are about to marry literally negotiate the divorce before they get married? We use contracts when we don't have trust. So my point is that trust is profoundly significant in every important relationship we ever have. And it typically comes from a history effect. When I say history effect, I mean repeated interactions in which we as the counterparty keep promises. What if you called me and said, Dr. Bill, I've got to get to school, major test or whatever, big presentation, my car blew up, can you get me there? And if I say to you, I'll be there in drive time and get you there. So 10 minutes later, no, I don't have air brakes in my truck. But I show up 10 minutes later, get you to school. That's T1. That's our first interaction. I made a promise, I kept it. So if you and I have repeated interactions and we keep the promises that we make to each other, that's where trust typically comes from. It comes from this history. These repeated interactions when we keep the promises that we make. So I want to give you a quick definition of trust. Trust is the willingness to be vulnerable because it's not so much that we're seeking benefit, but we expose our vulnerabilities to some counterparty because we don't think that this other person will be opportunistic. We don't think that the counterparty in this relationship will behave in a way that takes advantage of us. So trust it is the willingness to be vulnerable with the expectation that the counterparty will not behave opportunistically. She or he will not take advantage of us. So it's hard to get to trust, and it's really, really easy to break it. So I'm going to, in just a moment, actually I'll do it now. I'll move to the PowerPoint presentation now. It'll take me a moment to bring it up, but this is on our folio page. Here we go. I want to start with definitions. I think you've already realized my bias towards doing that. Excuse me, please. I'm going to define three terms: beliefs, values, and ethics. Beliefs are simply positions that we take based on information that we have. For example, what if you were signing up for classes and somebody said, Norton's a great teacher, and you signed up for my class, and after the first day or two you think that Norton's a complete jerk? At one point, you'd heard or thought that I was a good teacher, and then your experience suggests that I'm anything but. So my point is, and the reason I want to make this clear, is since beliefs are positions that we take based on information, the moment that we get better information is superior, our beliefs can change. So beliefs are temporal. They only last in time as long as the information that we have supports them. That could be true of a car that you're driving or a cell phone carrier, it doesn't really matter. Beliefs are impermanent because they're based on information that we have. Now, values. Values are durable end states. They are principles. The classic definition of a principle would be some fundamental truth that we apply across multiple situations. So values are very, very durable. And we tend to form one set of values as children, probably by the time we're 7 or 8 years old. And then I want to share this with you because it excites me. There's a lot of research, primarily done by psychologists because they study values, they study individual behavior. And there's evidence to suggest that many of you over the next maybe 10 or 15 years, roughly from the age of 28 to maybe 38, somewhere in there, that your values become even more virtuous than they are now. Because if you think about yourself 15 years in the future, let me make this easy on me. Let me pretend that every one of you is 23. I know that's not true. But 15 years in the future makes you 38. So, what will happen to you between now and the age of 38? First of all, you'll finish a degree, I hope. You'll leave here, get a great job. That means you start a career. You'll be in one organization or you may change. That means that you have to take on a broader set of responsibilities for managing your financial affairs. Not just paying bills, but investing and insuring property and health and your life and things like that. You'll have to consider some sort of retirement plan, won't you? You'll probably buy a residence. It could be a condo, it could be a home, doesn't really matter, but you'll probably buy a residence. 70% of you will marry. Many of you who marry will have children. So first you become a spouse and you become a parent. You will lose loved ones. You may have a job loss, or you could be doing everything well and your company is acquired or goes out of business, or 100 things could happen. You may fight health problems, either you or loved ones. You may go to grad school, you may go in the military. There are so many things that will happen over the next 15 years. And the point is that those life experiences will shape you. And what the psychologists have discovered who study values is that in that roughly 10-year window from the age of about 28 to 38, we get better. We get more virtuous because these life experiences have informed us and they shape our values. So the difference primarily between beliefs and values is beliefs are impermanent because they're based on information. The moment we get better information, our beliefs could change, or they could be solidified, couldn't they? But values are very, very durable across time. If you believe in the sanctity of marriage, you're not going to be unfaithful even if you have opportunities. So my point is there are so many things that are very, very durable, and it doesn't matter what the situation is. Now, ethics are behaviors driven by individual values. Ethics are behaviors. It's not what we think, it's how we act. But these behaviors are driven by individual values. And I want you to think about this relationship between values and behaviors. If you watched me interact with some student in the hall and did something that you didn't like, you might say, oh, Norton's an ethical rat. What if I said to you that I care about you? And I do. And you saw me in the hall, rubbing up on some cute girl's parts or something stupid like that, you would say, you rat. You said you were worthy of our trust, you said you care about us, and here you're taking advantage of position, to do some kind of a sexual harassment thing. So my point is, you would observe my behavior and say that I'm unethical. What you're doing is you're imposing your values on my behavior if you judge me to be unethical. So ethics are behaviors. And it's just important that we have this foundation. Beliefs, values, ethics. Beliefs are impermanent. Values are durable across time. Ethics are our behaviors as we act out our individual value systems. Excuse me. I have a slide now called Levels of Analysis, and I thought about taking this out of the slide deck, but I reflected on it before I actually filmed this presentation, and I decided to keep it, and I hope you see the value. I want to talk about behaviors at the individual level. Those are ethics. We just talked about that definitionally. But behaviors at the group level are driven by norms. And I don't know if you've had any of the org behavior courses yet, where you study how people behave in groups, but the classic definition of norms would be unwritten standards of behavior. A group develops norms. It develops these unwritten standards of behavior, and it enforces them. So norms are unwritten standards of behavior developed by and enforced by a group. And I'll bet every one of you is in groups. 6 of them, 25 of them. We are in so many groups, you and I. And almost all groups develop norms. And then at the organizational level, behaviors are driven by code of conduct. You can go to almost any major company's website, like you could go to Lowe's or something like that and do a little bit of a search, and you can pretty quickly find their code of conduct. The code of conduct essentially tells the employees what is permitted and what is not. It actually reads like the 10 Commandments in the Old Testament. Thou shalt not do this. Here's a classic example. Many companies have prohibitions on employees accepting gifts from anyone with whom they do business. And when I say prohibitions, they may permit something like $25. Like if I'm a vendor and you're a purchasing agent, if we go out to lunch and I pay, likely that would be under $25, and that's not going to influence your thinking. But if I say to you, you got any kids that need a new laptop or anything like that? Because I really need your business. What I'm trying to do is bribe you. So all I'm saying to you is that I want you to understand this levels of analysis. Behaviors at the individual level are ethics. They're driven by our own value systems. Behaviors at the group level are driven by norms. These unwritten standards of conduct that the group develops. And behaviors at the organizational level, like Georgia Southern or the U.S. Marine Corps or somebody like that, are driven by a codified, a written code of conduct. So now, that thing that says the great conundrum, I hate that word, I do, but my gosh, it fits here. A conundrum is a problem with no good answer. The great conundrum. If we talk about ethics, the conundrum is whose ethics apply. We're in a group. And is it possible that my values are different from your values? It is entirely possible, isn't it? For example, I grew up on a dairy farm. And in rural America, hunting and shooting and fishing is very much woven into the fabric. I'm former military. I've gone to war. I stood up and said, I will spill my blood to preserve liberty for people whom I will never meet. So it's fair to say that I'm pro-gun. And you may be on the gun control side of an issue. Nothing you say to me is going to change those values, because to me, firearms ownership is a freedom issue. To you, it's a control issue. And we are in constant tension. The same thing could be true of abortion. I will never impose my values on you. To me, abortion is the murder of an unborn child. To some of you, it is a choice. It is after the fact birth control. My point is that when we talk about this thing, this question, whose ethics apply, it's unanswerable. If we're doing anything in a group, because it's likely that our value systems, our individual value systems, are different. So, this impacts almost every organizational decision we make, because almost anything we do in an organization is going to impact people outside of the organization, those external stakeholders that I was talking about. I'm going to quickly craft an example, and it's going to be goofy, and you'll see that, but it will help me drive this point home. What if all of us, there are about 50, 55 of us if we're all in a room together, what if all of us were middle managers for Georgia Power, and Georgia Power literally bought the Wendy's on Fair Road and crushed it, raised it, knocked it to the ground, because we, Georgia Power, are going to build a small nuclear power generating facility right on that footprint. Saxby stays, 180 Fitness stays, but what was Wendy's is now ours, and we're going to build a nuclear power generating plant. So, what constituencies would be impacted? People at Wendy's all lost their jobs. Is it possible that some property owners could have their property values increase and others have theirs diminish? It is entirely possible. What about employment? To build a nuclear power plant usually takes 7, 8, 10 years. So we'd have high-paid construction workers here for most of a decade, putting money back in this community, buying Chevrolets and getting their hair cut and going to El Som for dinner or whatever the case may be. What about real estate? Because even after the construction ends, there's going to be a core group of people, well-trained, well-compensated, are going to run the facility. So that has impacts for housing. We, Georgia Power, now own a piece of real estate in the city of Statesboro worth billions of dollars. That means we're going to be paying hundreds of millions in property taxes, which benefit public education, highways, public safety, parks and rec, everything. So my point is, almost any decision that we make in an organization impacts people outside of the organization. And that's why I want to do that silly, let's build a nuclear power plant on Fair Road thing. Now, how do you reconcile competing perspectives? It's very difficult to do because I mentioned earlier, and I've done this a couple of times, that sometimes our values aren't just in tension, but they are just diametrically opposed. Diametrically opposed. And there's no resolution. So the best thing we can do, and I'm going to give you some guidance at the end of this presentation, there's actually a book about stakeholder theory. The best thing you can do is try to identify all the constituencies who are impacted, identify them, listen to them, try to discern what their concerns are, and see if you can craft a solution that is in some way meaningful. Now, it won't surprise you to hear that it will be impossible to satisfy some people. And I get that. But my point is, if you make an effort to make an ethical decision, if you consider who these constituencies are, how they're impacted, and see if you can do anything to make that impact positive, you have engaged in ethical decision making. So, the primary models for ethical decision making come from a Brit, John Stuart Mill, and a German, Immanuel Kant. I'm going to dismiss Kant's work very quickly. He's a philosopher. I've read his stuff for 15 years. I've been trying to figure it out, and I've discovered that people far brighter than me have not been able to do that. His work is not just dense, but it's not prescriptive. He says there's some universally great behavior, but he doesn't tell us what it is or how to get there. That's like me telling you to be lucky. I've told you nothing if I tell you to be lucky. So I know that's a harsh criticism, but his work doesn't have any practical application. John Stuart Mill, on the other hand, probably wrote this utilitarian model thing, 250 years ago. And of course, what he said is, he said, if you use this decision-making model, the utilitarian method, you will always do the greatest good for the greatest number. That's a pretty high standard. And of course, this is situational, and it describes most Western cultures. Cultures in other parts of the world don't follow this thing, but this ethical decision-making model. I was going to give you all an example from maritime law, but I don't think that it would work well because we don't have the opportunity to interact, so I'm going to skip over that. I had planned to, but I've decided not to. All right, I want to talk to you about the relationship between ethics and the law. Now, This declaration, law, society is the minimum standard of behavior, is Bill Norton's view of the world, but I think it's supportable. And the reason I say that is any violation of the law is met with some sort of a sanction. Like, what if I'm in Atlanta, and Atlanta has a leash law, and I'm out there with old Scooter Poop, and he's off the lead? I don't know if they arrest the dog or me. I've never seen a dog thrown over a police car, but maybe that happens. But my point is, I violated a municipal ordinance, haven't I? Let's pretend that I'm in my truck, and I'm headed to Savannah, I'm on I-16, and I'm rocking along at 71 miles an hour. I know, rocket man, I got it. Is it possible that a trooper from the Georgia State Patrol could ticket me for speeding? It is. I'm going faster than the speed limit. Now, it's improbable that a trooper would, since I'm probably well within that 10-mile-an-hour over thing. But my point is, I'm technically breaking the law. What if I'm a physician and I'm an unethical rat for whatever reasons, and I decide to write scripts for OxyContin or something? People aren't my patients to make a lot of money. What are the sanctions there? When I'm found, when it's discovered what I'm doing, my license will be stripped away from me. I will probably be prosecuted. I will probably go to jail. You know how that works. Bracelets, stripes, and a lot of new boyfriends. Yeah. So my point is, whether it's a municipal ordinance or a state law or a federal thing, it doesn't matter. If you violate any law, there's some sanction for it. You are held accountable, you are punished. That's not true with ethics, because ethics literally are our behaviors based on our values, aren't they? So, again, I regret that we're not together, because this makes for a pretty spirited discussion. But I'd like you to think about it. I want you to reflect on these two questions. Can you identify any behaviors that are ethical but illegal? And separately, can you identify any behaviors that are legal but unethical? I'll give you an example, I think. How about marijuana? I don't bother to keep track of this. I know a number of states permit medical marijuana, but I think there are about 12 states or so that permit the recreational use. And the state of California, unsurprisingly, described cannabis shops as essential businesses. And that just cracks me up. I can go to a shop in California and buy weed legally, but I have to pay my hairdresser in unmarked 20s in a dark alley to get my hair cut, because the cannabis shop is an essential business in California. Oh dear. Now, that's legal in California, and I think in 11 other states, but it's not legal federally, is it? In your view, is it ethical? It isn't in mine. You may think weed is harmless. Weed is a gateway drug, loved ones. It's illegal federally, and it's a gateway drug. Nobody stops with weed. They try all the stupid stuff like ecstasy or crack or whatever it is that they progress to. So my view, because these are my values, my view is that marijuana in some states may be legal, but it's certainly unethical. What about something that's ethical but illegal? I want to give you an example that probably predates your birth, but I think I can do this competently. Probably 30, maybe even 40 years ago, there was a physician practicing in the United States. His name is Jack Kevorkian. And I think Kevorkian was an oncologist. I think he was a cancer specialist. And well-trained, board certified, all the things that matter. I'm going to put the lights back on for just a moment. So Jack Kevorkian is an oncologist, and he treats people who are cancer patients. And what Kevorkian realized is that many of his patients, literally, he was with them as a healthcare practitioner to end of life. And he saw that many of them were in positions that were simply unrecoverable. There was no solution. They were in enormous pain and that sort of stuff. So Kevorkian did something that I think was ethical, but it was certainly illegal because he went to prison for it. Kevorkian developed a set of criteria, maybe 3 or 4 things. Then here's what he said to himself. He said, if any of my patients meets these criteria, 4 or 5 things, whatever it was, then I will assist them in committing suicide. And the criteria were something like this. within perhaps 90 or 120 days of end of life. Extreme pain, no solutions. Nothing will lessen the pain or take away the degrading of mental facilities or physical abilities. Just in a miserable, miserable place, just literally the last few weeks of their lives. So whatever these specific criteria were, if Jack Kevorkian had a patient that met these criteria, he would approach them in a private clinical setting, like in an examination room at his office, and say, look, this is my assessment of your condition. If you'd like, I will assist you in committing suicide. And by committing suicide, what he did is he just literally put an IV site in the forearm and he dripped in the drugs that are used to euthanize dogs. If your parents ever came home and said, well, Buttercup is in puppy heaven, didn't they take the dog, the aging, ailing dog to the vet, and the vet put him down? The vet euthanized them. They put in anesthesia. They just put in doses that don't permit you to wake up. So that's exactly what Kevorkian did. He laid out this opportunity to his patients and said, if you would like, I will assist you in the sense that I will set up an IV and I will drip in an anesthesia and I'll do it in sufficient doses that put you to sleep and you won't come back. And he did it on a number of occasions. Well, of course, when he was found out, that was illegal. And he went to prison and he stayed there for a number of years. He was released before his sentence was up because I think he himself developed a malignancy and he was permitted to go home and die somewhat gracefully. But my point is, the reason I wanted to tell you about Jack Kevorkian is in my corner of the world, that is ethical behavior. It's illegal, but it's ethical. Now those are my views. Those are my values. You don't have to match up with my values. I want you, though, to reflect on those two questions. Can you think of any behaviors that are ethical but illegal, and any that are legal and, in your view, unethical? I'm not going to test you on it, or at least I don't plan on it. Maybe I will. Maybe that will be an essay question. But again, I want you to see this significant disconnect between ethics and the law. The law is society's minimum standard of behavior. And if you and I fall below that minimum, there are sanctions. We pay a price for it. So this is this slide that says stakeholder theory is the last slide in the deck. That is the title of the book, Strategic Management and Stakeholder Approaches, written by a guy named Freeman in 1984. When I was in grad school, I read the book, and it was so powerful, I probably photocopied half of it and created a file. I sort of abstracted the things that I just thought were really powerful. Now, it turns out that Freeman reissued that book with some co-authors, virtually the same title, in 2010. And I bought a paperback copy on Amazon for 10 or 12 bucks or something like that. So my point is that this book, Strategic Management and Stakeholder Approach, should be in probably every university library on the planet and every public library. And you can buy it, even though the 84 version is out of print, you can buy the 2010 version, which still has Freeman as the first author, and the title is strikingly similar. Now, the reason I want you to know that is this was the first effort in the domain of business to develop a theory of ethics in the domain of business and then apply it to management practice. Pardon me? 35 years ago, the people in philosophy were doing this 3 centuries ago, the same for people in theology. So we, in the organizational sciences, are late to the party. But the reason that when I read this as a grad student, I photocopied half the book, is it's prescriptive. It gives you specific guidance on how you can manage stakeholders with competing interests, how you can make ethical decisions. And I wanted you to have this, that's the reason I put it in the slide deck, as a resource. Please, I invite you, grab this PowerPoint presentation and put it on a thumb drive. Not so much that you need all the slides, but I want you to know the citation, because I promise you, 6 months after you leave here, and you're working in an organization somewhere, you're going to be in a group, you'll have to make a decision, it's going to impact people outside of your organization, and you have to become ethical decision makers. You have to somehow identify who these stakeholder groups are, discern how they're impacted, and to the extent that you can, develop solutions. That resource helps. And that's the only reason that I wanted you to have it. And that's the fact that it's in the slide deck. So, let me go back to lights. That may be everything that I had intended for this presentation. Let me take a look. And it is. So now, I'm going to end session 4 with the question for attendance verification. Many, many variations of Murphy's Law, probably at least 100 of them. Which variant of Murphy's Law is my favorite? That is your attendance verification question. So, love you, and I'll see you soon.